Hey there, folks. Welcome to another episode of Broadcasting Seeds. I'm your host, Bennett Tanton, here to plow the fertile fields of your mind with a little something strange, a little unsettling, and maybe even a touch conspiratorial. Today, we're diving into a story that sounds like it was ripped straight out of a Hollywood script, or maybe your darkest campfire tales. But let me assure you, this isn't fiction. This is Honobia, Oklahoma, early 2000s. Picture this: a secluded cabin in the woods, the kind of place you'd go to get away from the world. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just you, your family, and the kind of peace and quiet that makes you forget the world's gone mad. But what if that quiet isn't as peaceful as it seems? What if one night you heard the woods wake up? Not the usual rustling leaves or howling coyotes, but something bigger, something heavier, something that leaves footprints the size of dinner plates. This episode, we're breaking down what's been dubbed the Siege of Honobia. It's a story of survival, fear, and what happens when humans collide with the unknown. We'll talk about the family's terrifying encounter, the evidence they left behind, and the bigger question: what if Sasquatch isn't just a tall tale? What if these creatures are real? And worse, they're watching us just as closely as we're looking for them. Buckle up, because this episode is part cryptid folklore, part survival horror, and part what-if exploration. So grab your flashlight, lock the doors, and maybe double-check that you're not being watched, because this one's going to get wild. Ready? Let's dig in. Let's start with the setting, because Honobia, Oklahoma isn't the kind of place you stumble into. It's remote, tucked deep into the Kiamichi Mountains, where the nearest neighbor might be a few miles of forest away, and the stars at night seem close enough to touch. The kind of place where you'd expect peace, quiet, and maybe the occasional deer wandering through your yard. What you wouldn't expect, though, is to find yourself in the middle of what can only be described as an unwelcome visit from the unknown. The story begins with a family living in this isolated cabin. No streetlights, no passing cars, just a homestead surrounded by the thick, shadowy woods. At first, it was small things: strange noises in the night, low guttural sounds that didn't quite match the usual symphony of the wilderness. Maybe a knock on the side of the house, maybe the feeling that something was watching them. It's the kind of thing you shrug off until you can't. One night, the noises grew louder, closer. Heavy footsteps crunched through the brush, louder than anything a deer or even a bear could make. Then came the glowing eyes in the darkness, watching. It's one thing to think you're alone and hear strange noises. It's another to look out your window and see what can only be described as something else. The family was rattled, but like any good Oklahomans, they weren't exactly defenseless. They grabbed their rifles, their shotguns, and prepared for whatever was out there. At first, they thought it might be people messing with them. That theory didn't hold water for long. Whoever or whatever it was, they weren't just passing through. They were testing boundaries, making noise, throwing rocks at the house. Rocks, not pebbles, not stones, rocks, large enough to dent siding and shake the windows. The family was under siege. Every night the activity ramped up. Loud knocks on the walls, movement on the roof, even the occasional glimpse of a tall, broad figure moving just beyond the tree line. They'd shine lights into the woods and catch fleeting glimpses of shadowy forms, bigger than men, faster than they should have been. By the second or third night, fear gave way to survival instinct. They set up a perimeter, fortified doors and windows, and stayed armed at all times. But even with all their precautions, they were outnumbered. The creatures, or whatever they were, seemed to be working together, communicating in a way that made the family question just how wild these beings were. It wasn't just a random encounter. This was organized, calculated. The creatures seemed to be testing their limits, watching for weak points. At one point, they found fences torn down and tools scattered, deliberate acts, not random destruction. It was as if the intruders were sending a message. We're here, and we're not leaving. What makes this part of the story so unsettling is the calculated nature of it all. These weren't mindless animals acting on instinct. This was something intelligent, something with a plan. And that's where things start to get really uncomfortable. Was it territorial, defensive, or were they just curious about the humans who had wandered into their domain? Whatever the case, the family wasn't sticking around to find out. They eventually packed up and left, leaving their cabin and this strange, terrifying chapter of their lives behind. Now, let's get into the meat of what makes the Siege of Honobia more than just a scary story told around a campfire. The evidence. This wasn't just a case of a family hearing spooky noises and overreacting. What they left behind, and what investigators later found, adds layers of credibility to their account. First, let's talk physical evidence. Around the property, large footprints were discovered, big enough to make Shaquille O'Neal feel like he's got small feet. These weren't your average bear tracks either. They were human-like, with 5 distinct toes and a stride that suggested something much taller and heavier than your average forest critter. The depth of the impressions told another story. Whatever made them wasn't just tall, but massively heavy, far beyond what even the largest human could manage. Then there were the marks on the house. The family reported heavy pounding on the walls, and the evidence backed them up. Investigators found dents and scratches on the siding, with some marks positioned so high that they would have required a ladder, or a creature standing well over 8 feet tall. Rocks littered the yard, many large enough to have been weapons, not debris. Some were embedded in the ground, as though hurled with serious force. But the most unsettling piece of physical evidence was the damage to the fences. Entire sections were torn down, not with brute, clumsy force, but with a precision that hinted at deliberate sabotage. Tools stored outside the cabin were found moved or scattered, as if someone or something had been examining them. It's one thing to lose a tool. It's another to realize it's been moved 50 yards into the woods. Eyewitness accounts add even more weight to the story. The family described seeing at least 3 distinct creatures during the ordeal. They claimed these figures were enormous, broad-shouldered, and covered in dark, matted hair. Their eyes, glowing in the darkness, seemed to reflect the light of flashlights in a way no known animals should. And here's the kicker. The family wasn't alone in their experiences. Neighbors, hunters, and even curious locals who ventured near the property reported similar sightings and strange happenings in the area. They spoke of guttural growls and howls that didn't match any known wildlife. One hunter claimed to have seen a large figure disappear into the woods, moving faster than any human could. Local Sasquatch researchers and enthusiasts descended on Honobia when word of the incident got out. Some came armed with equipment, game cameras, audio recorders, even thermal imaging. While not all their findings were conclusive, a few stood out. One recording captured an eerie, almost otherworldly howl that no wildlife expert could confidently identify. Another investigator reportedly found hair samples near the property, though testing proved inconclusive, as it didn't match any known species. Of course, skeptics will always raise an eyebrow. They'll argue that the footprints could have been faked, the noises exaggerated, or the family simply mistaken about what they saw. But here's the thing. This wasn't a one-off encounter. The sheer volume of physical evidence and corroborating eyewitness reports makes it much harder to dismiss. This wasn't just a family who scared themselves silly in the woods. This was something bigger, something that left its mark, literally and figuratively, on anyone who came too close. So, what does it all mean? Could it be that Sasquatch isn't just an urban legend, but a flesh and blood creature quietly sharing the woods with us? And if so, what does that say about the limits of human knowledge, or the arrogance of assuming we've discovered everything there is to find? So, what kind of creature does this? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? To understand what might have been stalking the family in Honobia, we have to step back and look at the bigger picture of Sasquatch behavior, or at least what we think we know about it. Let's start with what we saw at Honobia, the calculated, almost militaristic approach of these creatures. This wasn't some random animal sniffing around for food. The creatures displayed what can only be described as strategy, knocking on walls to test boundaries, hurling rocks to intimidate, tearing down fences to disrupt the family's sense of safety. That's not just intelligence, that's organized thought. Some researchers have likened these behaviors to primate tactics, particularly those of gorillas or chimpanzees in the wild. These animals are known to throw objects and engage in territorial displays to assert dominance or ward off perceived threats. But what if it's more than that? What if this wasn't just territorial behavior? Some theorists believe that Sasquatch operates in small, tight-knit social groups, much like wolves or even early humans. The way the creatures at Honobia seem to work together, communicating through vocalizations, moving as a unit, suggests a level of social complexity that goes far beyond what we see in most wildlife. Could Sasquatch have their own hierarchy, their own tribes, if you will? And if that's true, what does that mean for us, the unwelcome intruders in their territory? There's another angle to consider: curiosity. While the events at Honobia were undeniably terrifying for the family involved, it's worth asking whether the creatures ever intended to harm them. Some researchers propose that Sasquatch may view humans the way we view them, as mysterious, potentially dangerous, but also fascinating. The rock throwing, the knocking on walls, the movement just at the edge of the tree line. It could all have been a way of observing, testing, and interacting without crossing a line. Think of it as their version of knocking on the neighbor's door to borrow sugar, if the neighbor was 8 feet tall and covered in fur. But then there's the darker side of the theory. What if the siege wasn't curiosity, but a warning? Many indigenous cultures have legends of wild men or forest giants, beings that are often described as protectors of nature. Some tribes in the Pacific Northwest view Sasquatch as guardians of the land, creatures that don't take kindly to humans encroaching on their domain. Could the Honobia incident have been an example of these creatures enforcing their boundaries, letting the family know they had crossed a line? And then there's the possibility that Sasquatch is something more than a mere animal. Some researchers and theorists speculate that Sasquatch may possess abilities we don't fully understand: heightened senses, advanced communication, maybe even some kind of spiritual or supernatural connection. It sounds far-fetched, sure, but then again, so does the idea of an 8-foot-tall hairy biped roaming the woods in the first place. If we're going to entertain one wild idea, why not a few more? This brings us to a fundamental question. If Sasquatch is real, and let's just say if for now, why haven't we caught one? Why hasn't someone dragged a body out of the woods or snapped a photo so clear it would make the cover of Time? The answer might lie in what we've already seen at Honobia. These creatures are elusive, intelligent, and possibly even capable of avoiding detection in ways we don't yet understand. Whether it's through sheer cunning, heightened awareness, or some other unknown factor, they seem to have mastered the art of living in the shadows. And maybe that's what's most unsettling about the Siege of Honobia. It's not just that these creatures might exist, it's that they might be smarter, faster, and more resourceful than we've given them credit for. They're not just hiding from us, they're actively staying one step ahead. So where does that leave us? The Honobia incident is a case study in what happens when humanity bumps up against the unknown. It challenges our assumptions, forces us to confront our fears, and reminds us that the world is still full of mysteries we can't explain. And maybe, just maybe, that's a good thing. After all, life's a lot more interesting when the woods aren't empty, isn't it? And there you have it, folks. The Siege of Honobia. A story that's equal parts chilling, fascinating, and humbling. If this tale teaches us anything, it's that there's still so much we don't understand about the world around us. Whether you believe in Sasquatch or not, there's no denying that events like this push the boundaries of what we think we know, and force us to question what might be lurking just out of sight. Maybe the Honobia creatures were curious, maybe they were territorial, or maybe they were sending a message. Whatever the case, their actions, and the evidence left behind, are a reminder that the line between myth and reality isn't as clear as we like to think. As always, my goal here at Broadcasting Seeds is to plant ideas, spark curiosity, and get you thinking about the strange, the unexplained, and what it all means for us as individuals and as a society. Because let's face it, life's too short to ignore the mysteries that make it interesting. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor, like it, share it, and leave a review. It helps us grow, and it helps get these stories out to more people. And hey, if you've got your own strange encounter or theory to share, I'd love to hear it. Drop me a line. Maybe your story will be the seed for a future episode. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and maybe think twice before wandering too far into the woods. I'm Bennett Tanton, and this is Broadcasting Seeds. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Yeah, I got bad thoughts that make my mind scared. Hold me hostage and they don't fight fair. Who gon' pray for me and wipe all my tears? Who gon' save me if you not right here? Move this darkness and make my sight clear. Take me away cause I don't like here. Ghosts of my past, they feeling the night air. Wake me up, I'm trapped in my nightmares. Wake me up, I'm trapped in my nightmares. Drowning, I'm off the deep end. Apparitions of all my demons. All my thoughts are committing treason. All alone, who gon' hear me screaming? Manifestations of my fears. Regrets that stretched out for light years. Can almost touch the light, homie, it's right there. Body free but trapped in my nightmares.
Wake me up, don't let me drown.